to welcome the governor and senator to our capital. We're grateful that you would come all this way to have the meeting, to make sure that that we are both taking the steps that we need to take to avoid an incident the likes of which we saw last year, and also to look to the future in terms of better water management and flood mitigation in the Souris River. The flooding we saw on the Souris River in 2011 was an unprecedented event. Of all the water that has flowed down the Souris River in the last century, 25% of it flowed through last year. Of all the water that flowed through that river in the last century, 25% of it happened last year. And because of that, there was significant damage and significant loss. And before I go any further, I want to extend to the people of Minot and to others in North Dakota who were affected, and obviously to the people in our province who were affected, our very best wishes, as recovery is still happening from the very many who simply had to leave their homes and who are facing rebuilding even today. We want to extend that to you, Governor, and through you to the people of the great state of North Dakota. There was extensive flooding, by the way, despite the decision from the province under the International Operating Plan to begin releasing water in December of 2010. What we have learned from last year's flooding is going to guide our decisions this year and in the years to come. For the past few months, a joint technical working group, which has been made up of officials from both jurisdictions, has been looking at what we can do to lessen the damage, to mitigate against what happened last year. And I think we're making good progress. We've already been releasing water from the Rafferty and Almeida reservoirs. The Saskatchewan Watershed Authority confirms levels in the reservoirs are now 1 meter, about a yard, below what is called normal operating levels. However, given the extraordinary events of last spring, we have agreed on both sides of the border to be monitoring the situation very carefully with respect to snowpack, with respect to rains that might come, and we obviously will have some flexibility to increase the release and avoid what we saw, hopefully avoid obviously what we saw last year. If there is another unprecedented spring rain, and we had 4 or 5 major events in June of last year, culminating on the 23rd of June, we are going to be prepared to limit the problem. As you can imagine, last year's flooding has also prompted us to take a much closer look at the 2 dams themselves. I have some good news on that front. The first dam that we've looked at with the help of engineers has been Alameda. And the news is good from that dam's perspective in terms of its structure and stability. In fact, it can probably handle a bit more in terms of reservoir than we had thought. We'll get a final report though on that in the days ahead, and then we'll move on to Rafferty. As government officials together with engineers will look at that particular dam and make sure it can do everything that we need it to do, and perhaps, as in the case of Alameda, a little bit more. I do want to express my thanks to the governor and the senator and all of the officials from North Dakota who, during the event last year and since the event, have been doing everything together with our officials that we can to learn everything we can from a 1 in 500 year event and prepare for this particular spring upcoming. I also want to inform the press conference that we are on a bilateral basis, and through the Souris Basin Board, through the operating agencies on both sides, we're looking at the long term. We have an agreement from 1989 that has informed everything we've done very successfully up until last year in this particular, in the Souris River Valley Basin. But we need to look at that agreement and potentially update it now that we've seen a 1 in 500 year event. Remember that agreement and all of the agreements attendant to it have been based on managing basically a snowpack related flood event. What we saw this spring was a snowpack that was very, very high, but also large, but also a very significant rain event through June in those 4 or 5 events that I've already referenced. And so can we do better by that 1989 agreement? I think the short answer is yes, especially when there is goodwill and common sense on both sides, and I want to assure our respective citizens on both sides of the border that there is a lot of goodwill And there are a lot of common sense that will be brought to bear so that we can make things even better than they have been for these number of decades. Governor?
Very good. Thank you very much, Premier Wall, and thank you for hosting us today. Your hospitality has been just fantastic, and we really did not expect this wonderful treatment. And it's been a pleasure to come up here. Took us 1 hour to get here, so in today's terms, we are close neighbors and not far away from each other at all. I'm very pleased with the meeting that we had today. First of all, let me say, reviewing the history of 2011, obviously we have developed a newfound interest in the Alameda and Rafferty dams. We didn't realize, I guess, until this year how significant they could be in the lives of North Dakotans. And as we looked at what happened, without a doubt, the greatest natural catastrophe in the history of Minot, 10,000 people evacuated, 4,000 structures damaged by water, and according to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, the third largest temporary housing effort in the United States history, ranking only behind Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Ike. So the impact obviously was tremendous on our state, and we have a very, very deep interest in understanding what we can do to manage the Souris River in the future, and do anything that we can that can avoid this type of catastrophe from ever occurring again. I would like to say that we had a very productive meeting today. This was not just a lot of general discussion. First of all, let me say I am satisfied, going through all the details of last year, that there is nothing that our Saskatchewan neighbors could have done or would have done that would have improved the situation on the river whatsoever. We were overwhelmed by a catastrophic amount of water, approximately 3 times the all-time record flow in Minot, and the way the dams were managed was exactly according to plan, and every decision that could have been made was made properly. We did, however, identify, I think, 5 important things. Number one, we feel that it will be possible to expand the operating plan for the dams to include management strategies for what we would call the rainfall season. The operating plan is so oriented to snow runoff that has never really properly addressed what might or could happen in a rainfall season. That's a significant improvement to the operating plan that we can and will execute. Second of all, we believe that the information regarding the condition of the dams is going to prove to be positive. This has not been totally finalized yet, but it looks good that the dams are okay. Number 3, we made it clear amongst ourselves that despite the limitations of the operating plan, it's very clear that in any emergency situation, such as we had last spring, Canada and the United States do have the latitude under the operating plan to do whatever they feel is necessary to do in the way of releases or water releases or water management. That's also very important to us, that we are not constrained by our own planning. Fourth, we, I think, have agreed that there is good logic in investigating the long-term target flows through the entire Souris River Basin, both in Canada and in the United States. Is there potentially long-term a better way to manage the channel to provide more flexibility? And finally, the fifth thing, although it may seem like a small detail, I think it would have been very important in 2011. It appears that we can get better rain gauge data delivered more promptly and more accurately to the United States in the event of a major rainfall event such as we had in June of 2011. That information can be translated into forecast tributary flows, which in turn can be translated into the flows into the Rafferty Reservoir. That information would have been very useful in 2011, and we've identified a way that we can improve the availability and the speed with which that information comes forward. So, several things were accomplished today. I think I'd like to commend the Premier and his ministers and all of his officials, his professionals, on taking a very constructive attitude towards managing these dams in the best possible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before the senator comments, I want to point out that the rain gauge, the precipitation reports issue is an important one. We're actually working on it now. We need Environment Canada. We need the federal government's cooperation in this respect, and we're fully expecting that will be the case. Senator.
Premier, thank you. Thank you for hosting us today. Minister Duncan, thank you as well. Appreciate it very much. As Governor Dalrymple said, the hospitality has been fantastic. And frankly, I'm not surprised in the least, because we have such a tremendous relationship between the state of North Dakota and the province of Saskatchewan. And so coming here, we're coming to see friends. We're coming to visit our friends and longstanding friends. And we appreciate your help and cooperation during the flood, and we appreciate your help and cooperation now. And this is about working together in the best way possible, communicating and using common sense to protect our people on both sides of the border. You have the same issues we do. We had terrible flooding in the state of North Dakota this year, in Minot and in the Souris River Basin, but all over the state. The Missouri River, Devil's Lake, and Red River, eastern part of the state, the James, the Cheyenne, flooding all over. But you had flooding here too. And you had people whose homes were destroyed too. And so this is about working together to protect people, protect lives, to protect property. And the reception here has been exactly what we expected, and that's wonderful. And so thank you. I actually lived in Minot back in the '69 flood. I know it's hard for Governor Dalrymple to believe I'm that old. But I was there back when we were hitting the '69 flood and in the early '70s, and when the community of Minot worked with Saskatchewan and with both the Canadian authorities and the United States authorities, the state of North Dakota, to build these dams and develop this flood protection. And it has worked wonderfully up until this past year. And so now we do need to revisit what we're doing and how we're doing it, and make sure that we make the changes necessary to protect, again, people and property on both sides of the border. Governor Dalrymple went through a number of very important things, but one of the things we did at the federal level this year is that we required the U.S. State Department, Secretary Clinton, to have the International Joint Commission direct the International Souris River Board to reevaluate the flood agreement. And one of the things that Premier Wall told us today that's very important is that they have the ability to take any emergency measures that need to be taken on the part of the Saskatchewan Watershed Authority, working with our State Water Commission in North Dakota to address any issues as far as protecting people now, protecting people here in Saskatchewan and in North Dakota for this spring, for the runoff this spring and for summer events. They have the authority and the flexibility to do what they need to do in terms of the annual operating plan to protect people now, based on conditions that we have on the ground now. Longer term, though, we have to revise the 1989 agreement, which is exactly what we're working to do at the state and the local, the state and provincial, and the respective federal levels. And we have to work together to do that, and then that has to be tied into both your needs up here, both for water and flood management, as well as what Governor Dalrymple, the people of Minot, and throughout the Souris River Basin are doing in terms of building their flood protection. It has to match. So the permanent agreement, as well as the annual operating plans, have to match the flood protections that we're building and now putting in place, which is starting right away in earnest this fall. On behalf of the federal government, we'll have more than $1 billion coming into North Dakota in terms of flood recovery funding, help with people who have been flooded, and probably $700 million of that will be in Minot and in the Souris River Valley. The state is making a big commitment as well. So this is something we have to do together to get it right. And that's why this type of meeting is so very important, and why we have to have more of them. But again, I want to finish where I started, and that's by thanking the Premier for your leadership here and for your willingness to work with us so well. And also, Minister, thank you.